Hi everyone and welcome to Shaluso. And today we're going to actually be taking a viewer suggestion, and that's regarding jewelry brands and jewelry retailers like Cartier and Bucherer that make watches and whether those watches are any good and what you should look out for with them. So a little bit of context first. A few decades ago, it wasn't that uncommon for established jewelry brands like Cartier or Tiffany to be selling watch brands. You know, it wasn't uncommon to find a Rolex being sold in Tiffany & Co., for example, or being sold in Cartier, such to the point that they actually featured those jewelry brands' names on the dials. That's why if you look up, for example, Tiffany dial GMT or Cartier dial Submariner, those will actually cost significantly more. Now they're collectibles, because obviously this practice has stopped, and that was largely because Rolex didn't want those jewelers modifying their watches before they sold them. But the point being is that jewelry brands have been associated with watches for a long time. And a lot of jewelry brands that most people know just for making jewelry actually make really good watches. But the danger, and I guess where this question lies, is there's also a lot of jewelry brands that will just put a cheap quartz movement into a watch, slap their brand name on it, and call it a day. And that tends to bring down and bring a little bit of a stigma towards jewelry brands that make watches. So today I'm going to give you 3 examples of watches made by jewelry retailers and jewelry brands that prove that just because a company is known for making jewelry doesn't mean that they can't make an amazing watch. Now the first watch on my list is probably one of the most significant developments in watches in general, and that is the Cartier Santos. The reason why it was so significant is because it was one of the first pilot's watches. Now you may not look at the Santos and see it as a pilot's watch, but in 1904 when Alberto Santos Dumont requested Louis Cartier make him a wristwatch so that he could operate the controls of his dirigible without having to take his hands off them, well, of course, Cartier obliged. At the time, Cartier was known for making bespoke watches for noblemen and people who had a lot of money, so this was right up their alley. And what they did is they made him the Santos. And that was essentially not only the first pilot's watch, but it was also one of the first men's wristwatches. And that contribution made a huge difference. Right now, the Cartier Santos is an icon. You can see it on the wrist of fictional characters like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street to real-life celebrities like Jake Gyllenhaal, who's currently a Cartier brand ambassador. So its impact is obvious. But what about the technical stuff? Well, to start off, Cartier has been known for using off-the-shelf movements, but as with every other watch brand in the last few years, they've started shifting towards their own manufacture movements. And being part of the Richemont group, they have the money and the backing and the know-how to do so. So on the inside of the current Santos, we have the caliber 1847. There's a manufacture movement made specifically for this watch, and while it's not necessarily the most technically advanced movement, it is still made by them for them. It's not something that they've bought from another company. But even beyond that, in the ergonomics, some people think of jewelry brand watches as being just all form and no function. But the Santos' latest iteration, released in 2018, features 2 new developments that help with the ergonomics of the watch, and they're both to do with the bracelet. The first is Quick Switch. This is a system by which you can actually change the bracelet to a strap, which is included, by the way, with the watch. You can actually change it without using any tools whatsoever. Now that's not something too groundbreaking, but what is SmartLink. SmartLink allows you to actually resize the watch without using any tools. Now this is a major development because while there are things like Glide Lock or the Omega Push Clasp, these are things that are part of the clasp. This allows you to actually dismantle the bracelet entirely just by using your fingernails. And this is a great advancement because it means you don't need a bulky dive clasp if you want to adjust your watch on the fly. Now the next watch on the list is from a company called Carl F Bucherer. And they are of course associated and named after the jewelry brand and watch retailer Bucherer, which is one of the oldest retailers in Switzerland. Now the Carl F Bucherer Manero definitely brings something different to the table, and that's in the form of its movement. Now a bit of history first. So Bucherer, much like Cartier, had been known for making their own watches and also by using off-the-shelf movements in order to manufacture them. But where Bucherer differs is that in 2007, they started to shift away from that on their own. They're not part of a big group like Richemont, so they didn't necessarily have that backing. But what they did have was the purchase of a watch manufacturer that I probably will not pronounce properly, so you'll see it on the screen around here. But once they did that, the next year, in 2008, they came out with the world's first reliably functioning peripheral rotor. So what that means is you actually have a rotor that goes around the movement as opposed to on top of it. This is not only advantageous because it makes the movement thinner, but it also means that you can see through it, you don't have something obscuring it. Peripheral rotors are normally used for tourbillons or for skeleton watches. Think, like the Audemars Piguet and Vacheron Constantin tourbillons, or some of their skeleton pieces as well. But the thing is that an established high horology watchmaker like Audemars Piguet, they hadn't even been able to make a peripheral rotor up until that point. They did come out with their own one a few years later, but it wasn't until Bucherer had already come out with theirs, and that was their caliber A1000. So that brings us to today with the caliber A2000 series, and this is featured in the Carl F Bucherer Manero Peripheral. This is a simple steel time and date watch, has a beautiful blue gradient dial, has a unique bracelet design, but it still features this peripheral rotor technology, and you can see that through the movement on the back. The finishing is obviously not as luxurious as you would have on an AP, but the technology is still there. And it only costs around $7,000 US. So when you factor that in, when you consider that to get a peripheral movement for pretty much any other watch, where it's almost always going to be a tourbillon or at the very least a skeleton, you're looking at paying well over $20,000, $50,000, even $100,000 if you're talking the case of an AP tourbillon or a Vacheron tourbillon, for example. So it represents amazing value, and they've still managed to bring something new to the world of watchmaking. But of course, we can't talk jewelry watches and innovations without mentioning the 5-time record holder, the Bulgari Octofinissimo. Now Bulgari, they didn't start making watches until the 80s. So the other brands like Bucherer and Cartier definitely had a head start. But when this jewelry maker decided to get into watches, they made sure that they caught up very quickly. Firstly, they enlisted Gerald Genta, the designer of the Royal Oak and Nautilus, to design their Bulgari. It's not the most creative name, but the design was iconic and it shaped their design language. And the relationship with Genta continued up until 1999 when they actually bought Daniel Roth and the Gerald Genta brand. So this brought them in officially as part of Bulgari, and then a few years later they came out with the Octo. Now the Octo has evolved a lot since it was released. It started out as a very chunky watch, decently thick, and it featured a bi-retrograde and it had Gerald Genta's name on the dial. That then evolved to the Octo Roma and the Octofinissimo. The Octofinissimo was a hit right away, and the Octofinissimo line has broken 5 world records. Most recently, they've broken the record of the world's thinnest automatic chronograph GMT. And they did that just this year. So what they did to achieve that with their caliber 318 is they not only made a watch that was 6.9 millimeters thick that featured a chronograph, automatic winding, and a second time zone, but they also did it while using a platinum peripheral rotor. So they took the technology that we highlighted with the Manero, but they essentially put it on overdrive. By using a platinum winding mass, which they had already used as a micro rotor in some other Octofinissimos, they maximized the winding capacity of it. And it still features a 55-hour power reserve. But let's go back to that thickness again. This is 6.9 millimeters thick. There are watches whose entire movement, when they're just time or even time and day, is thicker than that. So the fact that they've managed to achieve this on a beautiful titanium watch, sandblasted titanium, it's a beautiful finish, it looks completely different to any other watch on the market, is yet another example of a jewelry brand not only making something that looks really nice, but something that's actually advanced watchmaking, that's advanced the technology, and has brought something new to the market that no other watch brand is offering. Now this of course does come at a price. It costs a bit over $17,000 US. But again, when you consider platinum peripheral rotor, automatic, chronograph, GMT, world record holder in titanium, there's not a lot of other watches that can compete with that on even 2 of those 3 characteristics. So the fact that they've managed to do this really has helped to advance watchmaking and prove that Bulgari is something to be taken seriously. Now with regard to the prices on all of these and this stigma about jewelry watches. So the first thing is that the stigma is clearly wrong. Being made by a jewelry brand does not mean that the watch is not a real watch, or it's not high horology, or it's not legitimate horology. They can still make amazing watches that in many cases push the boundaries even further. And I think that's partly due to the fact that these brands know that to be taken seriously, they need to come up with something that's more than just a Submariner alternative or a Daytona alternative. They need to create something that looks amazing and that also brings it in terms of the functionality. And the other thing is that because of this stigma, this also affects the second-hand prices. All of these watches, when new, still represent quite good value compared to established watch brands or dedicated watch brands. But on top of that, their pre-owned prices tend to depreciate a lot. This means that us as consumers can take advantage of that and pick these up for a steal. So now that you've learned a little bit more about jewelry brands that make watches, let me know in the comments below what you think of these three and what you think about watches made by jewelry brands in general. Do you still think that at the end of the day, a watch that's made by a jewelry brand, not a dedicated watch manufacturer, shouldn't be taken seriously? Do you not care? Or has this maybe changed your perspective, or would you maybe even want one of these three or some of the other models in their lineup? I'd love to know in the comments below, so do make sure you comment. If you like the video, please do like it and share it. And of course, if you want to keep seeing new watch content every week, then subscribe to Shaluso as well. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.